All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
What's worse than feminist response to the Movember initiative? Their response to International Men's Day.
You wouldn't dare!
Oh, wouldn't I?
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. Last week on HBR Talk, we discussed the Movember Foundation and feminism's evolving opposition to the organization and its men's health initiatives. This week, we're approaching International Men's Day, another initiative that feminists have for years turned up annually to bemoan and belittle. The same ideology that tells us male suicide is a result of toxic masculinity, or more specifically, men's tendency to not speak up about their issues the way women do, also tells us that International Men's Day is unnecessary because men don't have issues to highlight. Then, the same ideology that says men don't have issues to highlight goes on to blame men for the existence and incidence of said issues, ignoring their own movement's contribution to the causes of many of the conditions men face. For instance, some of the biggest proponents of the hypermasculinity that feminists call toxic are women's advocates demanding that men act as institutional and public bodyguards for women. These ideologues totally hate male violence, unless it's used for women's benefit. Feminists say abused men don't get help because they don't talk about their abuse, but whose survey method designed to obscure or outright ignore men's abuse experiences has become the standard in intimate partner and sexual violence prevalence research? Oh wait, that'd be feminist professor Mary P. Koss, whose work was promoted by feminist icon Gloria Steinem in feminist publication Ms. Magazine. The data from that type of research is used as guidance for police and prosecutor response to reports of these types of violence, leaving men with little to no recourse and great risk of being presumed perpetrators instead of victims, regardless of the facts of their cases. We're told every day is International Men's Day, but what exactly does our society do every day for men that would make it anywhere near the equivalent of the treatment women get on International Women's Day? What discussion about men's issues is commonplace on any normal day? In what ways are men ever celebrated just for being men? What society-wide efforts are in place to recognize ways in which men are disadvantaged, and what reform initiatives are in place? If your list is coming up sparse or empty, perhaps, maybe it's because not every day is International Men's Day. So perhaps, if critics of the celebration really are part of a movement that is about equality, one day out of the entire year could be about men's issues, men's lives, and celebration of men and masculinity, just as International Women's Day is for women. I'm not talking about a day during which women's advocates disparage rugged masculinity outside of service to women as toxic, order men around, try to determine their identity for them, and castigate and admonish them over their supposed patriarchal crimes of privilege and prejudice. That'd be an International Feminist Ideology Day with the label men's slapped over it to excuse the behavior. I'm talking about a day to remember that the phrase human rights isn't gendered, but is about all human beings, including men. As stated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. On International Men's Day, we should be looking at ways in which our society does not live up to those standards where men and boys are concerned, and seek to reform law and policy that, by design, presumes them less than human. We should be celebrating the great history of achievement that is the legacy of masculinity. Men built every civilization, spent their labor maintaining them, their blood defending them, and their lives providing for their loved ones within them. They are the foundation upon which everything we have today stands, and the backbone of our society. Ideology that dehumanizes the entire male gender in response to women's issues treats them as gods and devils, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-consuming. Its practitioners can dismiss male victims of abuse because those gods can take care of themselves. They can dismiss the falsely accused because those devils probably did something to justify the accusation anyway. They can deride fathers' advocates over custody issues because those demons are deadbeats and abusers, right? They can ignore all legitimacy in child support issues because those gods just sweat money. They can laugh about male suicide because who mourns the death of the devil? They can excuse every atrocious attitude and every malicious act supported by it if they simply forget or ignore one thing. Neither gods nor devils, men and boys are human, all human, only human, and deserving of recognition as subjects and beneficiaries of every human rights declaration. This International Men's Day is a great day to celebrate men and to support men's human rights, because men are human. What other reason do you need? This week on HBR Talk, we'll be discussing International Men's Day, feminism's historically hysterical reaction to it, and why there needs to be a day to highlight men's issues and celebrate men's humanity. The discussion streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in at 7:30 p.m. Eastern via the link in the low bar, or find other viewing and listening options at badgerfeed.com. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 109. It's not International Whine About Men Day. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren B. to talk about the upcoming International Men's Day and raising awareness of men's issues, as well as feminist misandric reactions to it, including their efforts to make it all about, well, feminism. But first, a couple of reminders. If you haven't already, you need to head on over to badgerfeed.com and register to receive notifications if you want to know what the Badgers have going on every day. If you want to support our work despite the latest, greatest, next best crackdown on speech, feedthebadger.com is the most stable way to help. So remember, folks, information is power and we have it. Go to Badgerfeed for information and feed the Badger to help us share that information. And speaking of sharing information, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. Grab some popcorn, throw open the gates of reason, and unleash your friendly neighborhood badgers on Normie Society. And Normie Society needs to hear from all of us, the entire movement. Folks are starting to wake up to the issues that men and boys face under existing law and policy. It's getting to the point where even feminists can't deny it. They're going to have to go to their secondary strategy of claiming that whatever issues men are experiencing, women are most affected.
Yeah, and you know, this is why I think women are so important in the men's rights movement, because it is the mothers of these young men who, you know, experience the things that their sons go through. And, you know, it's really, they are the ones that see firsthand what happens. And, you know, it's us women who need to speak out and, you know, say something, you know, not be silent and just let it go. I just wish there were more.
You know, that is a good point. During the 7 years in hell case, the mother of the target, the victim, was just, she was beside herself with anger. She had accepted the wife, the ex-wife, you know, that was making all of the allegations into the family, and been mom to her. And after the divorce, you know, she was kind to her. She wasn't vindictive or mean. She was a really kind lady. I only had the good fortune to meet her a couple of times. And then the third time I got to see her, she was in her casket. She passed away during that ordeal. And so she did not get to see it end. But her awareness of the wrongness of that, had she been healthy, she had cancer, but had she been healthy, she would have been a real firebrand for the movement. She was somebody that would have stood up against wrongdoing. And I think a lot of women who have had husbands, second wives are another group that has that situation. You know, they've had husbands that have gone through ordeals of wrongful, like, exaggeration of their child support obligation, where the ex-wife stops working or works under the table and claims she's making less money than she actually does, or accuses him of making more money than he actually does, or accuses him of making less money than he actually could, and tries to get imputed income-based obligations and stuff. You know, women are seeing their husbands go through this. They're seeing their husbands go through it at work in ordeals with women who make allegations of sexual harassment over things that are not sexual harassment. They're seeing their sons mistreated at school. They're seeing their boys given the short end of the stick in terms of their education. They're seeing their boys treated like defective girls. And they're seeing their boys treated like predators in kindergarten. So that is, we do have a, I guess, a unique perspective, because we're not the ones that it's happening to. We're not the person inside the ordeal of the false allegation. We're the person who can see the experience that he's having and the strategy that's being used against him.
Yeah, and you know, not to use the meme, you know, women most affected, but you know, I think it is the women who are affected, and you know, a lot of times it's mostly like the women who partner up with men that have gone through something like this, and you know, they see just the ridiculousn's that these men, they're now men, have to go through. And you know, they see it as wrong. You know, it's just inconceivable that, you know, my ex, who now makes more money than I do, is still demanding child support for a child who, and you know, from what I'm understanding, and I guess in the state of New York, child support goes all the way up to the age of 21.
And some states, if the child goes to university, it goes through the amount of time it takes to get a bachelor's.
Yeah, and this is just ridiculous. I mean, this is not child support. This is adult support, right? This child can go and serve in the military, can risk their lives in the military. They can smoke, they can drink, whatever, but this is still considered a child in the eyes of the law, and the father is still, you know, most times it is the father. We rarely see cases where a mother is paying child support, but it is mostly the father that has to foot the bill for all of this.
And most of the times when women are paying child support, it isn't on behalf of the father. It's not to a custodial dad. It's to a foster care system. More women, I think, are paying child support whose children are in foster care than whose children are with the father. And one of the big problems with this is another men's issue, that this one's kind of an invisible men's issue, because we don't get a lot of discussion going about the Child Protective Services system. And one of the problems within the system is, if you have a divorced set of parents and the mother had custody of the child for whatever reason, maybe they went through the default divorce process and they have joint custody, but the mother is the primary custodial parent, or maybe the father wasn't in a position to get custody, and so the mother just has full custody. maybe the court didn't even award custody. Maybe that was the divorce agreement. Maybe the parents decided together that that was the right thing, right? So there could be any situation behind the mother having custody. But if the mother is abusive or neglectful, or the state decides to take the child out of the mother's home on the accusation of those things, or if the mother marries somebody or has a live-in boyfriend or girlfriend who is abusive or neglectful, and the state decides to take the child out of the home, they should automatically first consider the father for custody. They should first consider the father, and then the second consideration should be grandparents and aunts and uncles. But instead, they plunk the child directly into the foster care system more often than not. And I've seen this with children of people that I know who have had ordeals with the Child Protective Services system, where there's been an accusation, or there's been a misunderstanding, or there's actually been neglect. And the father was perfectly available and perfectly capable and a perfectly good parent, but was never considered when it was time to change the custody situation of the child, and actually had to fight for his right and go to parenting classes to get a chance to raise his own child.
Right.
So it's really a crazy situation.
Yeah. And you have to take into account the fact that, you have men who are, they're ousted from their house, right? The mother decides that she's not happy with the situation, so she kicks the father out of the house, and he just, he willingly leaves because the law is just gonna side with the woman,
or she says, "I'll say you hit me," which is what my husband's ex-wife said.
Right, but then you have a man who is now on the hook for all of this child support, on top of his own living expenses, which, I know a lot of guys, they don't really have a place to go. They live with friends, or they sleep on couches. And
or they become homeless, completely homeless.
Right. But, just to... for them to try to have any kind of contact with their child, it is only a financial burden on top of, they don't have it as it is, but it's just piled on top of them. If they want to see their child, they have to hire a lawyer. Hopefully they're hiring lawyers, and not trying to do this on their own. We see a lot of people go through the legal system, and they try to, litigate this stuff on their own, and it doesn't work that way. You have to know the ins and outs of the judicial system, and they don't always work in men's favor. But it's just how the financial burden is almost always on the man, on the father.
Yep. And that's one of the things that it's hard to get people to understand why that's wrong. It's not raising awareness of that particular issue, because people know, for the most part, I think, that people expect, in fact, for the most part, that the child support system is going to mostly impact men, and that custody is going to mostly go to mothers. In fact, that's been the norm for so long that people are surprised when the situation is the opposite.
Yeah, like with the Britney Spears, Kevin Federline thing, right? Like, he went and he actually got alimony or child support, Well, good for him.
I think he probably had custody because of Spears's public meltdowns and breakdowns and everything. It was pretty obvious that she was not really in a position to be good for her kids. And
that
was one of those. The thing that most people don't know is how hard that is when there isn't a public record of the mother's issues.
Right. Well, now, public is one thing. It's a matter of how public is it, right? Because you know, you can have a mother who everybody who knows her is completely fucking insane, right? But yet and still when they get to court, it's a matter of how the judge feels about it, right? Because people can they they can lie and say, oh, well, no, this guy, he's just an asshole, he's this and he's that and he's abusive, and you know, and it's up to the judge to determine if that is, if it's true, if it's viable. And
Well,
you know, if it's not such a public case like like a Britney Spears, she's a celebrity and she's, you know, had this spotlight on her for decades, you know, it's going to be a lot harder for anyone to convince a judge that, yeah, this woman is crazy, unless she has like actual medical diagnoses against her.
yeah, and see, this is the thing. You can have a situation where there's those diagnoses and everything in court. All the information's available. The exact same information could be available as you saw in the Spears case, right? But if it's not public, you know, and so the judge doesn't have to worry about other people are going to know I ruled in favor of this professional train wreck. There have been instances, and I mean, I've done interviews with guys, talked to different guys and everything. I did a live stream with one father in Canada who had documentation of things like his wife hearing voices and having violent tendencies and everything, and the mother still got custody of the child. And we've done a news story, at least one news story, on a situation where there were obvious red flags like that, and the mother was given custody by the judge, and the father complained about it after the mother killed the child, and the judge tried to punish the father for speaking out about the wrongness of the court ruling and the fact that his child's death was blood on the judge's hands. And this is the way our society works, and it's going to continue that way until like we get people to recognize that it's not always, you know, right to default to the mother. It's not always right to assume that if there's a better parent, it's the female parent. And it's not necessarily abuse to tell a woman to get her shit together before she can be responsible for a child. And, you know, you can say that about, you can call it abuse to say, you know, you got to get your shit together before you can be responsible for a child, if the person is looking at your job versus their job, and maybe they feel like they're a more professional person, and maybe they're just being snobby. But it's another thing entirely when the mother is on drugs, or she isn't working at all, or she's, you know, a revolving whore, or, you know, not to be confused with, you know, people who are able to engage in adult relationships and be responsible about it. But if she's got a different boyfriend every day and she's putting the child at risk of, you know, guys that she hasn't vetted coming into the house or whatever, not judging men for character and obviously displaying bad character herself, then yeah, it's perfectly fine to say, you know, get your shit together. The father should have custody. But we don't do that as a society. We accuse people who make those complaints or make those suggestions of slut shaming, and you know, which is, in my opinion, I don't really think slut shaming is as bad as everybody says. No, you know, especially now. This is not to say that women have to be virgins all of their lives until they get married. I'm not down on adult people being able to have sex with each other and thinking that men should be able to do it and women can't. But women should have to be as responsible for themselves in that situation as men are. And anything that a guy would be considered a predator for doing, a woman shouldn't be, you know, able to say, well, stop slut shaming me. Anything a guy would be considered unethical or immoral for doing, a woman shouldn't be able to excuse herself by saying, stop slut shaming me. That's a double standard.
Right, exactly. And especially if we are to hold women, because I mean it's just the fact. Like, you cannot force a woman to abort a child. So if women are the ones who unilaterally have the decision whether to have or do not have the child, you know, I, I don't want to go, I don't want to say that I'm in favor of slut shaming, because, you know, if you're a slut and you're ashamed of it, well then, you know, that's on you. You know, if you're a slut and you're fucking happy with it, then great, you know. But it's, if when we're talking about children, when children get involved, that becomes a whole different ball game, right? Because it is only that woman that has to figure out who the father of the child is. You know, if you're going to be promiscuous and sleep around with numerous men, then it is only you that has the decision to have the child and then figure out who the father of the child is. But what happens in the court system is all she has to do is point a finger at a guy and have his address, you know, because that's where the paperwork gets sent. And if that man either, you know, doesn't live technically at that address or doesn't get the mail, then he's on the hook. They don't care. They do not care if you got the right guy. And, you know, I'm not sure if you know, they have evolved to the point where, you know, we can actually say, well, this is my DNA test and I'm obviously not the father of this child. But I think at that point, it's beyond anything. Like, it doesn't matter, because she pointed you out and you accepted that, yes, you had sex with this woman and this child could potentially be yours. It doesn't matter. You are now on the hook for this child. And to try to reverse that is just, it's such an undertaking that so many men just don't have the finances to try to exonerate themselves from this.
Now, that's another situation that, and this is the kind of thing that needs to be sort of brought into the public. A lot of guys don't really understand the risk they're at. I've heard probably a million times, you know, well, if you didn't take the risk, you wouldn't end up in that situation. If you didn't sleep with her, you wouldn't end up in that situation. Yeah. There's been situations where women have just randomly named guys they found on Facebook. Both for child support and as rape allegations. Yeah. So they didn't put themselves in a situation. They were simply dragged into it by an unscrupulous woman. But one of the things that I want to point out, when we talk about these things, like we talk about them on our live streams and we write about them in articles on sites like our blog is the Honey Badger Brigade blog. And then you have a Voice for Men, you have the National Coalition for Men. There's let's see, I don't know if I think the Spearhead's gone. But there's a lot of different sites out there with men's rights blogs, men's rights news sites, and so on. And I like the men's rights subreddit as a source for those. And you can actually, I guess you can find about 6 or 7 sites in their sidebar as well. Karen's blog is in the sidebar. In addition, I think, to mine, which is kind of, I haven't been using it much because most of the time when I write now, I write for the Honey Badger Brigade blog, but sometimes I put a new article or something up on mine. But in any case, we need to really start promoting those. Tom Golden's blog, Men Are Good. Dr. Tara Pomadier's blog, Shrink for Men, the Justice for Men and Boys website. We talk among ourselves a lot about men's issues, and we have events that we hold. International conference on men's issues. We've had meetups. Karen and Alison and Mike are all out doing events this week. I did put a link to one in the low bar of this stream that I know Mike is speaking at.
Messages for Men.
Yep. And I think Karen is also at that. I'm not sure if that's what Alison is doing or not. I may have that wrong. But we do a lot of things like that, and the men's rights community gets heavily involved in that stuff, but a lot of times it's us talking to us.
Yeah, and you know, I think what happens is, you know, a lot of times, I think most of the time, men don't seek out this information until they are already in that situation. Exactly, right? Like, we need to find a way to reach out to these young men who aren't, you know, they're still young, and they haven't gone through these trials and tribulations. But, you know, for a lot of these men that we talk to, a lot of the men that are involved, or at least curious about what we talk about, it's too far gone for them, you know, because they already, you know, the kid's already here, you know, they're already in this situation where they have to fight against the child's mother, you know, and defend themselves and try to, you know, reduce their child support, because it doesn't matter if the mother of your child is making 3 times, you know, as much money as you do, but the court said that you have to pay this amount, and it doesn't matter what your status is with a job. Like, it doesn't matter how much money you can create. If the court says that, well, you should be making this amount of money, or you have the potential to make this amount of money, it doesn't matter what you're doing right now. It doesn't matter what this whole breakdown of the family has done to you financially, because, you know, there are men paying through the nose just to support this child, and it doesn't matter. But they don't have the money to go back to the court to hire a lawyer and say, well, listen, I'm not doing that job anymore. I don't make this amount of money anymore, and I think my child support needs to be adjusted down to reflect my income. It doesn't happen because again, they are in such a financial lag that they can't. How do you do that? If you're not making enough money to even afford your child support, how do you afford to pay a lawyer to then go into the court system and say, hey, listen, I can't pay this bill. Can you adjust it down? You know, it's such a... God.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about, that we need to get, you know, that kind of information out. And this is one of the things that the general public can do, because, like, not everybody's going to have a live stream. Not everybody's going to write a blog. Not everybody is a writer. Not everybody is a talker and stuff like that. But almost everybody uses social media of some sort. Like, not everybody's on Twitter, but most of the time, if people are not on Twitter, they're on Facebook. If they're not on Facebook, they're on Reddit. If they're not on Reddit, they're on something else. And almost all of those sites allow you to post links to different things and in discussion and stuff. So one of the things that is helpful for getting the information out is if MRAs and men's advocates basically become sort of familiar with the media of the movement, you know, sort of become familiar with different blogs, different groups that do podcasts and so on, and share them as much as possible. Like, that's one of the reasons I have that as part of our opener, you know, as part of our intro, that if you want to increase the power of change, you know, that the men's rights movement has the capability of achieving, you got to get people aware of what we're talking about, and that is going to involve sharing the information that we share on different social media platforms.
Yeah, and I don't think that, the men that are going through this, it's not that they're not aware. I think they just don't know where to go. I think they just feel like they're just drowning, and they don't really know that there are people out here who are willing to help and talk to you about this stuff. At the very least, we can talk you through these things and tell you how to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, in fact, that's sort of how I found the movement was kind of a convoluted path. In the late 90s, when I got together with my husband, and his ex-wife started acting screwy about child support and custody and everything, I started looking online for information about custody issues and then later about fathers' rights. And because I was sure there had to be something, as I knew already that there were problems with custody being unequal and with the court treating men unequally. I already had some friends who were divorced who had experienced problems. And so when it started happening to my husband, and I went looking, mostly what I found at the time in the early 90s, it was a lot harder to find websites that had discussion of men's issues. There were other forums. There were not quite bulletin board systems, but similar forums that had posts and stuff from men's groups, and there were men's group areas on different forums and everything, but there really wasn't a lot. There were blogs, and there was advice from people, and there were a few attorneys out there that were giving advice for fathers with custody issues, and honestly, everything I found was discouraging at the time. It was basically, your ex-wife has custody of the child, well, you're fucked. And this is what you got to do to survive. Not this is how you can win, this is what we can do to help, this is how you can get fair treatment in court, but you can't get fair treatment in court, but this is how to minimize the damage.
Yeah.
And that really threw me for a loop. And we ended up making decisions based on a combination of what the attorney we hired advised and what information I was able to find on a lot of sites. It determined for us that rather than fighting for custody at the time in a state that had a propensity to rule against men, even if they were able to prove the mother unfit, which we weren't going to be able to do. She's not an unfit mother, she just hates him. But in any case, we really didn't have a snowball's chance in hell when it came to custody. So we made sure to stay within the distance that the courts allowed for a father to be from his children and still retain visitation rights. So, and that was, that's all we could do. And that was those decisions were from finding that information. And, today we have a wealth of spaces where information can be shared. And it's not just, it's not just online. Like, you've heard of the, the 4chan pranks, I guess you could say, where they've posted things like it's okay to be white and Islam was right about women and stuff. Those get attention. And if somebody, I'm not suggesting do an illegal thing. Like, I think some of the places that they posted it was illegal to post there, but there's areas where it's perfectly legal to post. Like, most grocery stores have a bulletin board that you're allowed to post community awareness stuff on. There's other places that, allow for posting on, something that you can thumbtack or nail to a utility pole. You can find out if it's legal or not to attach something to you, staple gun it to a utility pole or something. Don't just trust that people's garage sale signs are a sign of that. That could be fake, or not fake, but not being enforced because it's a garage sale sign and it's coming down in a couple of days. But
yeah, and I think if you have like a garage sale kind of sign, you have to get approval from
that,
yeah, from the city or county or whatever. But yeah, no, you don't want to do stuff like that. But
postering is actually a highly effective way of drawing attention to an issue. And I've actually put stickers up before. There was a fellow that brought a bunch of stickers to the KSU Men conference that Sage Gerard initiated, and he basically gave them to a bunch of people. Here, put these up. And there's all kinds of places where you can put stuff like that. And I spread them pretty much all over through the states between Georgia and Ohio on my way back. I put them up all over. I've been all over Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Illinois, been in those areas, put stickers up there. I've put stickers up in Michigan. There was a pole we were going past. We were walking past it, and it had a label on it that said it was okay to put stickers on that. That pole was specifically for putting stickers and posters, so I put one on there. And all it says is something like, "Isn't it still domestic violence if she is committing the violence?" And I've gone around and looked, and there's been a few places where people have like torn my stickers down. There's one where somebody tried to and failed because it was put up pretty well, but that lets me know as much as anything that people saw it. I put one on the bulletin board at my local grocery store, and it was taken down within 24 hours, and I asked the staff, and they're like, "We didn't touch it." So I put another one up, and the individual that took it down that first day didn't come back for several days, so it stayed up. But I mean, and that led to a Voice for Men's website. But anything like that, anybody can put up signs, anybody can put up stickers, anybody can poster. That's something that you don't have to be a prominent figure in the men's rights movement to do. And if you want somebody to look at a particular website, put the name of the website on what you're putting up.
You know what I like to do? I like to, if I go to the Apple store, because they have all the iPads and, MacBooks, whatever set up. I like to go and just spam. Like I'll put, you go and you do the Google search and you put up the websites or whatever, and you just watch the reaction. But it's a good way just to get people to acknowledge, like, oh, this is a thing. And maybe it doesn't apply to me. Maybe I don't care about it, but maybe there's someone who's walking past the screen and says, "Whoa, what is this?" And they take a second to look, and then they do their own research, and they come into this whole men's rights activism, advocacy thing. Maybe there's something that applies to them. Maybe they're estranged from their children and they don't know how to get back in touch with them. And, maybe there's some way for them to find some kind of information, something that will help them along the way to do that. And I think it's really important, just because a judge says that, the mother has this percentage of custody, it doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with your children. And I think a lot of men just kind of give up because the judge says, well, no, you have to pay, but you don't get to see your kids. It's the shittiest end of the stick.
Yeah,
but it doesn't. It doesn't mean that that's where you have to give up. Even after the whole child support thing is over, it doesn't mean that you should stop trying to have a relationship with your children. And I think a lot of children need to know that just because your mother has put you off of their father, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't at least try to have a relationship with your father. You know, any child that has gone through a divorce or any kind of separation like that, I think that it's important that you at least try to reach out to your father and figure out what happened. Because a lot of times mothers will completely lie about how your father is. They will lie and say that he was a deadbeat. Oh, he was this, he was that, he was just no good. And
he didn't make any effort to try to see you. Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times kids will go out and reach out to their fathers and find out that it just wasn't true.
Yep.
And it's a healing thing. It's a healing process. You have to know the other half of who you are. I think it's very important, and people really shouldn't overlook that. We like to say that women can do it all. We can raise children and we can do that, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fine. But there's a whole other half to your equation. And if your mother is just downplaying that for your entire life, then I think it is incumbent upon you to, kind of reach out and say, well, is this true? Is what she said true? Is my father really a fucking deadbeat? Did he really not want to be a part of my life? And a lot of times I think that's not the case. A lot of these men want to see their kids. They want to be a part of their kids' lives, but they have just been ousted because the legal system allows it to happen.
And that's one that this is a tough one for people. You have probably friends and family that have been through ordeals of parental alienation and maybe don't know it, and they just think their dad's a deadbeat. And
exactly.
You hear them complain. It's not wrong to speak up and say, well, how do you know for sure that that's what happened unless you contact him or try to contact him? And now if the person has actually been through a direct experience of rejection, then yeah, they know. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the individual, a lot of times, the individual is getting all of their information from a mom who doesn't want anything to do with the dad anymore, and it's a lot easier to get him out of her life if he gets him out of their life.
Right.
So it's, again, you don't have to be, one of the people who's out front and center and going on stage and speaking at events and stuff like that to help the people around you with situations like that. So when we end up talking about International Men's Day, and like next week we're going to do another topic that is related to International Men's Day, but I'll talk a little more about that later. We're not just talking about what should the government do, what can the big media organizations do. They don't care about us, right? They're not gonna do anything for us. In fact, if they care about us, they're threatened by us, and they're going to do things to us, not for us. So it really is on us. And it really is on your use of social media, your ability to promote different minds within the movement, your ability to pay attention to the issues, how the issues are affecting the people around you, and maybe advise the people around you a little bit. If you happen to know a good attorney for a friend who has come out and said, hey, my wife is leaving and she just made an allegation against me because she's going for custody and she thinks it's going to help her, or my wife is leaving and she has accused me of making money in secret that I don't have any idea what she's talking about, and you happen to know an attorney that has been successful for other people in the area, share that information. So you got to talk to this guy. You got somebody that's going to go represent themselves in a criminal case. Talk them out of it, because you really can't do that. You really can't represent yourself in a criminal case. You kind of be the voice to the individuals around you of the movement.
Yeah, and I would like to plug Mark Angelucci. He's a lawyer. Yeah, but he's with NCFM, right?
Yes.
National
Coalition for Men. He's in California.
Okay,
And
yeah.
So
And
he,
it would be great if we could get more, find more lawyers like that who are, sympathetic to men and their situations. It's kind of sad that we only really know of the one. I really wish there were more, but I also just wanted to kind of highlight how, when the whole LGBT thing, Pride Month happened, like all of the companies, all of these major companies, they all changed their symbols to reflect the rainbow, like they're all on board with this LGBT situation. And that's fine, but
well, LGBT identitarians as opposed to rights activists, because that's
yeah,
basically who's prominent in the discussion on LGBT issues is LGBT identitarians, not rights activists.
right. Right. But, imagine if they would all stand up and say, hey, there are men out here who have certain situations that need some kind of representation. Imagine if we could get something like that happening. I can't imagine it happening anytime soon, unfortunately.
You
But
never know,
that's
actually.
but that's why we're here. That's why we do what we do, because we have to get the word out there and talk to the people, and
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, men's issues advocates who work in the field of law, who are lawyers or who work with lawyers, who are familiar with trustworthy attorneys that would be, if you're in this area and you're experiencing an issue, this is the person to hire, would be able to get together and create a network.
Yeah.
That would be a helpful piece of information. I'm going to start us into some of the super chats because they're piling up. We've actually got more than I was expecting by this point in the show. So I'm going to start those. It doesn't mean that we're at the end of the discussion because there's another thing that I wanted to bring up. But let's start with Gamer Walkthroughs, who gave us, I think that's $10 Australian because it has an A in front of it. Either that or it's grade A money. But it said masculine republics give way to feminine democracies, and feminine democracies give way to tyranny. Aristotle. Well, and that is very true, and the thing that causes it is gynocentrism in both sexes, but in particular, everything that men have done throughout world history in terms of civilization building has been guided by the intent to protect and provide for their wives and their children. So
yes.
It's been and their focus on their wives, a lot of their focus on their wives, besides the companionship and everything, because marriage today is a lot different than it was historically, is really to take care of their children. So men have always taken care of women. With the expectation and understanding that women were the next line of defense for their children. And it's a wonderful thing for women that men do that, but it's quite handicapping to men.
Yeah.
And then there's a great debt on women's behalf because of that, although women don't recognize it for the most part today, that men have done all of this for our benefit, but it's instead we end up with women demanding more and more shit and more, freedom without any kind of accountability attached to it. And what Aristotle said is probably how every civilization eventually dies.
Yeah, and that's why I said what I said a couple of shows ago. Like, women have gotten spoiled to this idea that men are just supposed to. They are just supposed to take care of them and their kids. That's how we got to where we are right now. And I think it will take a lot more men standing up and saying, no, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not, this is why I am absolutely appreciative of the MGTOW community, because they get it. They get it. They understand that the laws that we have set in place are completely and totally against anything that men are for. They're just against men.
Yeah.
You
What's
know?
the matter, Lauren? Don't you respect women?
No, I respect people who show themselves to be respectful
And
I don't
respectable.
Exactly. People always say, "Oh, you have to respect the elderly." Well, the old people can be assholes too. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, that is not a factor. It's who you are and how you treat other people. Is that something that is worthy of respect? How you treat yourself, is that something worthy of respect? And I think people just, we get caught up in this idea that just because I think not even that. I think we conflate respect with basic civility, right? I can be civil to you. That doesn't mean that I respect you.
Yeah, we conflate respect with a lot of things. This is something that I wrote about before. When we hear, don't you respect women, I think a lot of times it's the other way around. Instead of conflating it with common courtesy, we conflate it with veneration. And then there's a lot of women who expect to be venerated, to be treated as something really special, like a princess or a queen, or a goddess, as a common courtesy.
Yeah.
That they think women are owed. And, they don't understand that the coddling that women have always had, where our sensibilities are given deference, and our wants and our needs are given deference in society, that was not just something that because you're women, that was expected, or that was something that was given as a sort of a trade-off for women being more gentle and more moral and more genteel. You can't have your sensibilities offended by somebody else's fart in public if you're going to fart in public too.
Right.
And today's women don't have any clue, really. I think about that. They don't, like, I don't have to be a lady, and I don't have to be treated like a lady. Right? But a lot of women only want the first half of that. They want the second half. They want to be treated like a lady, but they don't want to have to be a lady.
Right.
And,
right. Like if I don't know if you've seen that video that went around where there was a woman that got on a bus, I think, or a train or whatever.
Oh,
and
yeah,
she went mental. Nobody's gonna give up a seat. Yeah, nobody's
gonna be a gentleman.
Right.
Yeah, like, I took that video and I took the sound out of it, and I put some of the sound from that one Hitler movie in place, and it totally fit. And I did it because she has Hitler hair. I'm sorry, but she does. So, like, I put that out on Twitter a while back in response to somebody posting that video. It's a low-res copy, but I just thought it would be funny to do that. So I Hitlerized the woman with the Hitler hair and the misandric attitude of, who's going to give me a seat? Who's going to be a gentleman?
Yeah.
She's so ladylike,
Yeah. Right. and there's also the meme of, like, the pregnant woman that gets on a bus and, she's looking at everybody. Well, who's going to give me up their seat? It's like, well, next time, fuck somebody with a car, bitch.
Honestly. It's funny. I was thinking about when I was pregnant, standing up didn't bother me. It wasn't that big of a deal. If I'd have been on a bus and nobody had given me a seat, I wouldn't have been like, oh, I'm going to die because nobody gave me their seat. But if you really desperately want somebody to give you your seat, start faking labor. Like, oh! And instantly there's going to be, like, men, women, everybody's going to scoot away from you, and then you can sit down. Because they think your water's going to break, and then they don't want to get it all over them. But No, don't do that in real life. That's horrible.
That is not a trick that I will ever
do not
have
fake
to
labor. There's going to be fat chicks on buses doing that now. I want to sit down. Oh, the baby's coming.
Get off the bus and get in a cab, bitch.
Yeah.
What are you
No,
doing?
you can't do that, though, because somebody will call 911. Or 999, I guess, in Canada.
Yeah.
But next super chat, Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and says, idea, no politics December, which includes feminists. You know, it would be great. That would be great to have all of December, just no politics, no political discussion, enjoy the holidays, all of them, and celebrate with people who are of your particular faith or beliefs or whatever holiday is your favorite holiday, and then celebrate with people who practice something else and have different holidays than you do, so you get to eat more food and forget about politics. But it's not going to happen. I wish it would, but I think people are probably obsessed enough that that's just not the way it's going to be. I would say the best way to handle that is don't initiate a bunch of political crap if you don't want to deal with it, and let other people have their knockdown dragouts on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. And then if it comes up, don't run away from it.
Yeah, you know, the holidays are not really the place for those type of conversations to happen, you know, unless, I mean, hey, if that's your thing and everybody's into it, then cool. You know, I have yet to find a family that is down to, you know, just debate politics and still break bread at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But you know, it's really not the time for that. It's a time of coming together and, you know, just enjoying each other. And, you know, it's the end of the year, it's cold as fuck. You know, you just want to come together and sit down, have a good meal, and, you know, just relax and enjoy each other as you are. You know, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. Like, my family is so completely split down the middle because I'm half white, half black, right? So the white half, of course, they're mostly Republican. Of course, the black side is mostly Democratic, you know, but it doesn't mean that I can't sit down with them and just enjoy each other, you know, and reminisce about, you know, the days when we were younger and talk about, you know, the things that we went through and what we're going through now. But, you know, just dividing us into these groups of what you believe in and you know, where you sit politically, it really doesn't have any place in this situation, because this is about embracing each other and enjoying each other.
And if you can't get away from it, you can do what one of my family members did. I had two family members that were constantly butting heads over gay rights issues. One of them was very, very anti-gay rights and was all in about, you know, the gay conspiracy. And he was so anti-gay that he actually used the term sodomites. You know, they're not gays, they're sodomites. They don't use the word queer or the word gay, use the word sodomites. You know, and of course, the other family member didn't want to hear it. Is his name Ben Shapiro? No. But he was very old, and you know, grew up in a very different environment in a very different time, and really wasn't gonna learn new tricks in terms of political tolerance and stuff like that. And my younger family member, who really didn't either, she was kind of neutral in terms of, she wasn't for the more radical agendas that were coming out at the time, and that are the sort of the precursors to today's LGBT identitarians, as opposed to, hey, you know, just let us live our lives and don't fire us from our jobs because we're gay, and don't beat us up in the street because we're gay. Like, she was really opposed to the emerging identitarian stuff. So they would have had stuff in common, but she really didn't want to hear about sodomites because then that made her think of anal sex, and she really didn't want to think of anal sex, like, especially not all the time. So on Thanksgiving, earlier, they had this discussion. She's like, I really don't want to talk about this all the time, and I really don't want to hear the term sodomites all the time, right? See how many times I've said it in this show. And
if we were drinking, I'd be drunk.
Yeah. And so I don't want to talk to you about this, and I'm going to make a deal with you. If you don't talk to me about sodomites, I won't talk to you about fucking. Well, you say that to an old man, he's like, oh, about swallowed his teeth. But that ended the discussion, and there was no more problem for quite a while until the whole family's gathered around and he thought he could get away with it. Right? Well, now you can't say that to me because everybody's here.
Yeah.
Well, that didn't work. So he starts, and she sort of gave him a, hey, remember we had an agreement, 2 or 3 times, and he starts in about it and uses that terminology and everything. And the 3rd or 4th time, she's like, we had an agreement. If you didn't talk about sodomites, I wouldn't talk about fucking. Everyone at the dinner table went silent for a moment, because I'm in a family that's a major mix of conservative and very liberal, but most of them are religious. And most of them are very conservative in terms of what is polite in polite society, what is polite in public. So the idea of dropping an F-bomb onto the Thanksgiving dinner table was definitely not something that anybody expected.
That's quite opposite of my family, I must say.
Nobody said anything, in fact, until one of the cousins was like, go, Aunt, blah, blah, blah. And then everybody kind of tittered a little bit and went back to eating. Meanwhile, our minister and his wife were there, very carefully studying the nuances of the mashed potatoes until it was over. And that was the end of the discussion about sodomites. But, which was great for me because I didn't want to have to start arguing with both of them, because I had a totally different perspective, which was, can we live and let live and stop calling people bad just for having a sexual preference as an adult for other adults in consensual relationships, which would have started a whole other argument.
Right, exactly. And I think that it says a lot because, even when people claim that, there's racists amongst us, I would prefer to know who the racists are, because I know then how to behave around them. If I know it's not going to change who I am. It's not going to change how I behave. But if I know someone's like really kind of fucking racist, then, it's like, oh, okay, all right, well, you're just an asshole. And, but it doesn't mean that if someone has some kind of prejudice towards a certain group or ethnicity or whatever, that there's not something to learn from that person. Right? Even if it means that you learn that these ideas are wrong, you're still learning from that.
Yep.
And I think that this whole kind of cancel culture really detracts from the conversation, because you have to know what another person thinks so that you can form your own opinion about that. You have to know what is going on, what people think around you, so that you can form your own opinion about that and, either confirm or, go against that and learn something different. There's nothing wrong. Listen, I don't care if there are actual people who identify as the KKK. Let me know who they are, and I'll learn something from them. Maybe I can teach them something, like Daryl Davis did at the Minds Conference at the end of August. And he was great. He actively interacts with members of people who consider themselves white supremacists, and has actually changed a lot of their minds. But it's that interaction. You can't detract from that. You can't just say, oh, well, I know that this person thinks this way, so I'm just not going to interact with them. No. If you interact with them and try to dispel the things that they believe, then you're doing more good than harm. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Yeah, it's not fun to sit there in a room full of people who think differently than you do, and try to stand up and fortify your arguments against what they're saying. But if you can do that, you might be able to reach some people. They might actually change their thinking. You can't do that if you're just in this one homogenized group of people, and everyone thinks the same way, and everyone says the same things. If no one comes in and shakes that up and says, well, hey, wait a minute, did you think about this? Or have you thought about that? There's no way to progress the conversation if you're not willing to be in an uncomfortable situation and say, listen, I think differently, and maybe you should think about this, or maybe I can think about this.
Yeah, there's also something to be said for just being human in front of the other person. I've had people that were just absolute, like, racists are one type of asshole, but there's assholes come in all flavors.
Oh yeah.
And I've dealt with every stripe, and I've dealt with and actually, if your asshole is stripy, you need to change your underwear. But I have dealt with assholes that just started out with misconceptions, and I've run into people who made assumptions about me based on how I look or how I dress, or because I've always been kind of nerdy. I've always been kind of different in terms of. Different, not in a cool way, different like Eliza Doolittle at the racetrack from My Fair Lady, or worse, the racetrack Eliza Doolittle at the Queen's Ball, that kind of different. And so people have made assumptions about me. I've even had people assume that I am intellectually disabled, or that I have a mental health condition that I don't have. Because I've been different than they expected a person to be in that situation, or in the environment that they met me in. And I've had more than a few people tell me, after having engaged with me or interacted with me several times, boy, my first impression of you was extremely wrong. So yeah, I think a lot of times, and then you deal with somebody that your first impression is this person's an asshole, and actually it's just that they've gotten a bad impression of you, and you just crossed your wires. So there is something to be said for taking some time and learning from each other. And then the other end of it is, sometimes people are just assholes, and there's something to be said for surviving and thriving in spite of their bad attitudes. Yeah. And I've done that all my life too. We also have, let's see, this has progressed a bit, so I have to scroll back. Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and said, it's time to make Maury the official DNA tester of the U.S. That was, obviously, we were talking about child support and stuff. And I know one thing that I've definitely advocated for in the past, and I would continue to advocate for that, and that is, if somebody wants to contest their paternity, there should not be any legal barrier to that. In some countries there is. And a guy should have the right to have a DNA test done to determine his paternity, and even if he doesn't get all of the other results, even if there's laws to protect the privacy of the child and the DNA can't be like documented can't become part of a record or anything other than the fact that yes or no, this man is this child's father. I think every man who has been labeled a father has the right to know whether or not that's true, and he has the right to investigate whether or not that's true. I don't think he should be forced to investigate. There's been some advocates for mandatory DNA testing at birth, and I don't want to go that way. But I think every man should have the right to decide for himself whether to investigate that, and everyone, and when they grow up, should have the right to investigate that. So if you want your DNA tested, you should have the right to investigate that, to have that done.
I agree with that, but I am one of the people that says, you know, I do that there should be live DNA testing at every birth, but you know, I do kind of understand that, you know, it's not really feasible, although it would make the testing less expensive. You know, it would drive down the cost, because if you're doing it all the time, you know, then you have to employ these people, and you know, it would drive down the cost of DNA testing.
But it would drive up the cost of childbirth.
Well, drive up the cost of childbirth?
Yeah, because if you
actively having the kid?
Yep, if you give birth to a kid and the first thing after the birth is DNA testing, that's going to become part of that bill.
Well, hey, let's remove circumcision, and you know,
I like the idea of removing circumcision. But yes. In any case, here's the list of problems that I have with mandatory DNA testing. The first one is it's a medical privacy issue. Just like they don't do, my employer is allowed to do mandatory drug testing because it's voluntary. I'm a volunteer employee. Nobody came along and rounded me up and put me in a wagon and drove me to my employer's location and said, this is where you're going to work and you don't get a choice, right? I applied there and they hired me. But if I was a school kid and I was, you know, required to be a student at my local school, which is the way it is, you get truancy if you don't attend school or have a viable substitute, and the viable substitutes are under attack, then it would have been a different story. If they'd have done mandatory drug testing at my school, my parents would have objected as a course of, you know, this is my child's rights that you're treading on. And I feel the same way about DNA testing. That's the first thing. Nobody has the right to take your medical information against your will, and mandatory DNA testing would do that. The second thing is, and we did a show on this, and I don't remember if you were part of the show or not when this has been a while, I think, since we did a show on this, but there have been numerous instances in which things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com and all that, their DNA systems, testing systems, where you find out your ancestry and you find out maybe if you have the cancer gene or one of the cancer genes and stuff like that, law enforcement has used those as a suspect finder. And more often than not, they finger somebody who is wrong. That's not the right person. In fact, they have named infants as suspects in crimes because they have gotten DNA information that indicated that that person was a potential suspect. And of course, then they have to go down that path and investigate, is this a real suspect? And you know, when they find out it's an infant, they know they've wasted their time. But there's also the chance that this person could be an adult, and then the investigation goes further until the adult proves an alibi, or it's proved that the crime couldn't have been committed by that person or whatever. But it's a huge waste of police time in any of those instances. And on top of that, the individual who didn't commit the crime that gets labeled a suspect, their rights have been violated. Their due process rights have been violated. They've been subject to a wrongful criminal investigation, when there was no other reason to suspect them except that the police got what should be considered your private medical information.
Right. Well, you know, the only thing that I will say against that is that DNA is so easily transferred, right? You can just touch a person on on the shoulder or whatever, or just I was watching
it doesn't even have to be transferred, though, Lauren. The thing is, in your family, a good percentage of the men are going to, like, the same DNA test would flag several of the men in your family.
Exactly, right. But
not just,
again,
or several of the women in your family.
Right, but there have been cases where like a security guard has searched a person's purse and his DNA got onto the purse, and so because I was just watching the show on Netflix, I don't remember the name at the moment right now, but the DNA transfer is so sensitive. I mean, you can, because skin flakes, like, right, like if you think about dust is mostly flakes of dead skin, right? So DNA can be transferred unwittingly. You don't have to even, it doesn't have to be that you know.
Right, but it still doesn't make mandatory DNA testing any better. In fact, that actually makes it more dangerous, because generally speaking, a person becomes a suspect if there's some sort of evidence to place them at the scene of the crime or associate them with the crime in some way. But with law enforcement going to 23andMe with DNA samples, they now have this huge open database of potential wrong suspects that from across the country. So,
which has been leaked, by the way. They have been hacked, and
right.
Your information is out there. If you've ever donated any kind of your DNA to 23andMe, your DNA is out there. So I think these kind of things are evil. So I get it. I understand that. But again, all right. Let's assume that these things are not happening right now, but I guess I would go the way of what you're saying, is that if a father has a question, he should have a right to DNA test that child and make sure that it is his child, because only the mother is sure of, well, in certain situations. Unless you watch Maury.
Yeah. Only the mother can be certain of her parental status.
Exactly. And
the father cannot be certain of his parental status without proof. Now, I do say it should be mandatory that testing should be available. The father should have access to it. He should have the right to have that test done. And it should be handled in such a way that DNA testing doesn't result in any databasing of like data sharing of that information. The only thing that test is used for is to determine paternity, and once that determination is made, the only place that's recorded is in the child's chart. Medical chart. Which is private information.
I agree totally. And then you have, there's, I don't know if you know, but there's like this whole, there are people who will use their child's social security number and like get utility bills.
Yep.
In that child's name because it has a social security number. So, this whole, who are you and who do the companies recognize as a person? Do you really understand that this person is not, an adult? I mean, you say what you will about bureaucracy, but I think there is something to be said for a system where we have, like we do in the United States, if we are paying into like a social security system, that your social security number should not be used illegitimately. as it is. It's being abused, and no one is talking about it.
Oh, it's actually, there's whole industries built up around exploiting the fact that your information is not secure, and the likelihood of identity theft is actually fairly high.
Yes.
I've actually been a victim of identity theft, and you know, I've had money spent that in my name that wasn't spent by me and stuff. But no, that's under a lot of discussion. The thing is, as long as we have those systems, that's going to be a risk. And the only way to eliminate that risk is to eliminate those systems. And people are terrified of eliminating those systems. But hell, our generation isn't going to collect Social Security. Our generation's Social Security money was spent by the time we were out of high school.
Yeah.
And our children's generation of Social Security money is spent. You know, so like having that system really isn't all it's cracked up to be. But going on to the next super chat, we have Keyblade Master Andy gave us $2 Canadian and said these streams are often depressing. Yeah, this is some of these topics are really harsh and really rough, and it's partly why I try to, you know, add things in to lighten up as much as possible. And one of the reasons why I have a tendency to go into stories and stuff, because it can, on one hand, it does humanize the discussion, and on another hand, it sort of breaks up the depressing aspects of the stories, or of the discussions, the things that we're dealing with. Let's see. My poll interests gave us 99 cents and said, big smiley face. Big crazy looking smiley face, actually. Tyler Preston gave us $10 and said, you ladies' thoughts on how TV shows / movies always portray missing fathers as deadbeats, while mothers are shown to be horribly abusive to their children and portray the abuse as comedy. Well, I would say it's not necessarily always, but the deadbeat dad meme gets overused in television. The absentee mother is often, there's something else going on in television. I've seen shows where they presume the mother wrongly separated from the child more than they do the father and stuff like that. But I have seen shows where they treat female abuse of the people around her as comedy. And obviously, like, there's a degree to which I really strongly disagree with critics of presentations in general on television and in movies, because that's fiction.
Exactly.
But the fact that feminists bitch and moan about the way women are portrayed on television, but then are perfectly okay with negative stereotypes of men that make women look better than men, that's a level of hypocrisy that bothers the hell out of me. And it does bother me that we can't, like, feminists have pushed and pushed to a degree where we can't have positive portrayals of men. If we have positive portrayals of men, they get upset. And that's wrong.
Yeah, and you know, I would just like to say that, you know, it's called television programming for a reason. It's programming you into believing this stereotype about people.
Oh, I don't buy into that at all.
It's absolutely programming, absolutely.
No, well, they may be trying, but I don't think that people. I don't think people are shaped by television. I think people change the channel if they don't connect with something.
Well, adults do, but you know what adults with children do is they sit their kids down and let them watch TV at wild abandon, you know, and these kids are getting this messaging. It is absolutely a messaging going across the, you know, the public that is saying that, oh, the stupid aloof father has to come in and be saved by the much more smart mother. It's programming. That's why I suggest everyone turn the fucking television off.
Do you remember Captain Planet and the Planeteers?
Yes, I do. I didn't watch it that often, but exactly.
So that's my point. You didn't watch it. Why not?
I think because I was just too young.
I didn't watch it because it wasn't entertaining.
Yeah, it was just a little bit before my time.
I watched Spider-Man, but Captain Planet, I couldn't stand Captain Planet. It was not exciting. And there were other stuff like, other shows like that. When I was a really little kid, like I liked The Electric Company, which was made by the same people who did Sesame Street, right? I love The Electric Company.
Oh my God, yes.
That was modeled off of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In.
And the Bloodhound Gang.
Yep, and the Bloodhound Gang. See, I used to love those shows.
Yes.
I got a little less excited about Sesame Street, I think, than I did the Electric Company. And the other shows that were, that were educational, it was like 3-2-1 Contact. There was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I was not a Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood kid, and I can tell you why. I didn't need an external father figure. I had the best dad I could possibly have growing up. My father is a terrific, terrific father. One day I will do a show about my dad, and I will have you guys in tears. But because I can't talk enough about what a great man he is. But and then if I get into some of my uncles and the things that I learned from the men in my family, which is one of the things I'm going to discuss next week. I honestly, I really didn't need Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I think a lot of kids that did connect with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood were looking for something. Not that everybody had bad fathers, but that they were looking for something in addition to their household.
Yeah,
and,
because it was really like the crux of when fathers had been ousted from the family
unit. Right.
Right. So they were looking for and needed that kind of male figure to look for. So, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But
and
that's why.
So, like, the things that I found unentertaining or that weren't exciting or, and I'm familiar with I watched Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood when I would be home sick because there was children's programming and soap operas, and I hate soap operas. I would rather pull my own teeth out than sit and watch soap operas.
My mom was such a big soap opera. Like if I ever stayed at home, it was Days of Life, General Hospital. Oh my!
But
and to think that these shows are still going.
Running. Yeah. But my point is, like, television can affect you emotionally, and it can sort of lull you, to a sort of lower state of awareness. I think it can lull you into submission to a degree. But I don't think that it shapes people to the degree that, like, the folks that are on about comics and movies and games and stuff, making children into school shooters or making adults into criminals and stuff like that, they're full of crap. They really are full of crap.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that happens at all. I think that is more of a mental issue, and it's a perverse, like, understanding of what the media is kind of pushing, right? Like, so again, I do think that it is programming because you see the I guess I can say the alpha male, the Chad, going for the Stacy, and if you don't fit into that narrative, then of course you're going to look for outside sources of who am I and what should I be and how should I feel. And if you just are negative against that type of programming, then yeah, you are more susceptible to just having this kind of vindictive nature against what it is that you don't feel that you can connect with, right? Because we watch TV, we watch these programs, and if you don't identify with these people, then in some sort of way you kind of have some kind of, you don't like them.
Well, that's just it. I think instead of television shaping people, and programming people, I think what happens more often than not is people gravitate toward the types of programming that they're already in tune with, or that they're already that fits their interests. Not just I like sci-fi better than westerns or whatever, so I watch more sci-fi, but I have a tendency to see adults as independent, responsible for themselves, and so on. So I'm impatient with programming that wants to coddle people as not having responsibility for their own actions. So there's a lot of stuff on television today that I just can't stand. And actually, I happen to like westerns and stuff too. But it's not so much that I'm programmed by what I'm watching, but my viewing choices are programmed by my social attitudes. And I'm not entertained by watching people behave in a way that doesn't fit my conception of how people really are.
Right. Well,
unless it's intended to be ridiculous.
But it all depends on the individual, right? Like, there are some people who turn on the TV, and that is like, that's what they do all day, every day. And there are other people who can turn on the TV and watch a program and say, okay, that was good entertainment, but I still know who I am. They still have that constituency that, they know who they are, and they know that what they see on TV is just a portrayal of, some kind of fictitious characters, and they can separate that. Right?
Well, sure. I think most people are capable of separating that, and
I think so.
Yeah, most people are. Not only are most people capable of separating that.
Well, I think
most people actually choose what they're going to watch based on what they already have, as part of their character.
Yeah, I think that people can separate themselves from it, but the other half look at it and glamorize it and say, wow, that's something that I want to be. I want to find that, I want to find that rich millionaire, that basketball player that I can marry and have a kid with, and, then end up on a reality TV show.
Well, I think that person was already that kind of person before they started watching that stuff, though.
Oh, yeah.
Like, television just taps into that.
It taps into it and emphasizes it and just
it might feed it, but it doesn't cause it.
Well,
that's just like people who become addicted to soap operas. They're addicted to soap operas because they're drama hounds. They're not drama hounds because they're addicted to soap operas. You see what I mean?
I think one begets the other. Honestly, I think people, we really need to fucking turn off the television, because what you're looking at is just a glorified version of society. Like, this is not how people are. This is not how real people interact. It is the worst of society. This is the worst of how people are. This is not.
Well, that's like Jerry Springer. Actually,
yeah.
Jerry Springer, a lot of that stuff was fake.
Right.
But most people knew that.
But that is why that show is so popular and still going on to this day.
Yeah.
Because people feed off of that animosity. They feed off of that conflict.
Or just the ridiculousness of it.
Right.
There was a song on the Dr. Demento show when I was in college called "Damn Brother, I Don't Believe I'd Have Told That." That was a parody song about those types of shows. And it was basically like these are the sideshows of our day, and that stuff has always existed. I would say people probably had these discussions about plays, people had these discussions about music as music changed throughout history, and the reality is, I don't think any form of entertainment that we engage in is an outside influence that shapes our society. I think it's the other way around. I think that where people have said, you know, art imitating life, imitating art is a cycle, I think that cycle starts with art imitating life, because without that attitude or that perception to imitate, you wouldn't have a reason to create art. So I think when people blame television and people blame video games and people blame bad music, I'm all for using different types of media to affect your own attitude, and recognizing that your mood can be affected and stuff like that. But I really don't think that anybody should ever use television as an excuse for why people are deteriorating. I don't think that it is. I don't think it's an excuse at all. I think people sort of do that all on their own, and they might use those sources of entertainment as a crutch, but if they didn't have that, they'd be using something else. It would be alcohol, or it would be drugs, or it would be getting into fights with people, or it would be, you know, some other thing. If it wasn't a television show, it would be a game. If it wasn't a game, it would be an exercise program. You know, and I've seen people basically lose their personality or dump their personality into an obsession with something so many times that I just can't blame the thing. It's the person, and it's the attitude, and you know, people have to take control of their own lives and their own shape their own attitudes, and we cannot allow television, movies, games to become like either the scapegoat or the excuse for bad behavior, because it predates them, and if we eliminated them, it wouldn't stop. I'm going to go to the next super chat. We have Moogle Charm gave us $4.99 and said Atlas is shrugging. It's okay, so am I. Frenchinator 2 gave us $20 and said, I started a new job. We'll start donating. Trying to ignore the America First Nike Pose law in human form. I'm not sure what that is.
Congratulations on the new job.
Yeah, definitely congratulations, new job. He goes on to say, my father was Catholic, my mother Jewish, also Asperger's and neurotic. Identitarian version of Alex Jones. Oh, that could be fun. Could end up with straight frogs. Aw. Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and said, Hannah, you are once, twice, three times a lady, always. And I like the Kenny Rogers reference there, too. That's sweet. That's actually, Kenny Rogers is a happy childhood memory for me, because my bus driver used to help keep the kids. She had a genius idea, kept the kids behaving themselves, in part by playing Kenny Rogers and Kenny Rogers 8-track tape on the bus. If anybody needs to know what an 8-track tape is, you millennials, let me know. And we used to sing along with it. That, and she had the Oak Ridge Boys, and we used to sing along with that. So there we go. And Three Times a Lady was on. I'm pretty sure it was the Kenny Rogers tape. I hope it wasn't Oak Ridge Boys. I hope I'm not getting those mixed up. But I'm pretty sure it was Kenny Rogers, and that was always fun, riding on the bus, and we'd all sing along with the music and everything. Then we have Polaris589 gave us $5 and said, Hannah, is your relative Pastor James Manning the sodomite slayer? No, he was not. He was just a human being with a bad attitude toward a group of people. Based on outdated ideas and outdated information about them, and he was kind of too old and too stubborn to change his mind, but yeah, and our minister wasn't either. He wasn't like that either. So there we go. Ken Lee says, we had Hotel California on LP in math class. That had to be interesting. But, well, there we go. Some of the millennials were kids in the mid to late 80s, so they've seen a couple of them, Zirangs tells me. So the other thing I wanted to bring up, and we'll get into this a little bit, and that's feminist attitude towards the International Men's Day celebration and discussion and everything.
We haven't really talked about that.
Right. Every year on International Men's Day or shortly after, I go through the hashtag. I might not be able to do it this year, but I go through the hashtag and I find the tweets that feminists and other identitarians, liberal identitarians that are not really liberal, have gone through and left in response. And I found things like every day is International Men's Day, and International Men's Day is misogynistic, and International Misogynist Day. I found hashtag International Misogynist Day one year, I think. And I just all kinds of, excuses to hate men in the hashtag by feminists as if they really had to make the day about themselves. And it's been reducing. The first couple of years I was on Twitter, I had so much material, I probably could have made a half-hour video of feminists bitching about the discussion around International Men's Day. Last year, the thing that I found the most was feminists trying to make International Men's Day about toxic masculinity, their toxic masculinity narrative, and about men becoming better men from a feminist perspective. So basically, men calling out other men as abusive, men calling out other men as sexually violent, men changing what masculinity means to suit feminist ideals regarding masculinity, the idea that male suicide is caused by masculinity, and so on. And it looks to me like they are moving from outright, overt objection to discussion of men's issues to trying to take them over. And there was a bit of a pattern of that early on when I first started getting involved in the men's rights movement and everything. But it is like blatant and obvious, and it seems to be the primary thing going on now.
Yeah, and completely antithetical to what men actually are, right? Like, men are loving and men are caring and giving. They give of themselves when they don't need to. Men are just, they're protective, but it's this idea that, well, let's celebrate men. Well, why should we not celebrate men? Why should we not celebrate the things that they actually do to love and care and protect for not just women, but society? Right? Like, why should we just turn our backs on these men who actually give their lives, risk to protect the rest of us?
This is the thing that I've had arguments with feminists on International Men's Day and around the day about this very thing. We have all kinds of programs for women. We have all kinds of financial benefits for women, basically. We have grants to get women into professions that are perceived to be dominated by men. We have social programs intended to protect and provide for women. And most of those are funded by taxpayer dollars. Men pay more taxes than women do, and then women benefit from more programs than men do.
Yep.
Well, what do we have for men?
Not a goddamn thing. And even the things that we try to have for men just get shat upon by these fucking feminist women who say, well, we live in a patriarchy, and forget all the men that have died in all these wars because I feel oppressed and I don't earn as much money as a man because I decided to go have a kid and take, a couple of years off of work, but, I still don't earn, I don't take home as much as a man does. Well, have you tried working as hard and for as many hours as men do?
And working the same hours that men do, because a lot of times the person who takes the night shift, especially in a dangerous environment, It's the man.
Men.
The person who, takes the particular set of tasks in the job that involve being exposed to danger. It's the man. The person who comes in on the weekends, it's the man. The person who works overtime, usually the man.
Yeah.
So you're dealing with a whole set of factors that are affecting a woman's earnings. But that's one of the things that I've ended up in arguments with feminists about. When they turn around, well, every day is International Men's Day. Ask them why. Ask them why. What makes every day International Men's Day? What benefit do men get every day that makes that is the same as the kinds of benefits that women get on International Women's Day? What kind of praise are we heaping upon men just for being men? Because we do heap all kinds of praise on women just for being women.
Mm-hmm.
And when have you ever heard the idea spoken that a single dad can take a mother's place?
Never.
We hear it every Father's Day in terms in the reverse. Happy Father's Day to all of the single moms out there who do the job of both parents.
Exactly.
Bitch, if you just did the job of a mother, even just did the job of a mother, maybe you wouldn't be single.
Yes. Exactly.
That's one that I get really mad about, because a lot of these women that post, that post memes and post statements on their Facebook or their Twitter account or whatever, that single moms do the job of both parents, and I'm sitting there thinking, part of the job of a child's parent is to cooperate with the other parent for the benefit of the child. That's your job. You raise a child, your job is to see to the child's welfare, and it's in the child's best interest for you to work together with the other parent. How many single moms do that?
None.
Not very many.
Not very many. Exactly. And I see it on both sides. Like I know someone who she has 5 kids with her ex-husband, and I don't know what happened with the divorce, but basically he financially takes care of the kids, and she literally is like scraping together, her money so that she can survive, but she still, I don't know why she agreed to it, but she still goes, and she's got like 5 kids, okay? So she goes to the father's house, gets the kids ready for school, washes them, bathes them, feeds them, sends them off to school, and then at the end of the night, she does the same thing. She comes home and she them and takes care of them, make sure they get to school. But that is a rare occasion. Like I ever seen a situation like that where the mother has been ousted from the family, but still expected to come in and provide as though she's still, a part of the family. And the father of the kids, yes, he pays for the, he pays the rent, he pays, the bills or whatever. But, when it comes to like the extracurricular activities, it's kind of like he's just a dick, and he wants her to pay for this stuff. And I'm like, I sympathize with her, but I also know the opposite situation where it is the mother who is the breadwinner and pays for, it collects this child support, where she's not, the friend that I know, she's not obligated to pay for anything. She's just obligated to, spend her time. Well, I don't know if she even feels obligated or if it's like a court mandated thing, but she spends her time taking care of these kids, and it's probably because she's the mother. What woman wouldn't want to take care of her own children? But if it was reversed, I know so many guys that
I was going to say, there are some, though. There are some women that don't want to take care of their kids.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But in any case, when we're talking about the feminist response in this situation, so we have all this celebration of mothers. We have all this celebration of women in general, female beauty, female interests, female history. We have Women's History Month, right? We don't have a Men's History Month. We just have a Women's History Month, because only women's history is special. Even though, if you look at men's history, it's why there is a history.
Yeah.
But everything defaults to the man, and anything women have is special. That's the feminist attitude. So when they look at International Men's Day, they look at it from the perspective of believing that men already have everything, that recognition of any achievement is automatically directed at men, that recognition of human rights should automatically be directed at women, and that infringements on human rights never happen to men, or when they do happen to men, they're justified or they're not that big of a deal. So when they see this under discussion, when they see the hashtag, when they see politicians discussing it, like Jess Phillips went off her rocker, really, the one time in discussion over that, actually sneered and laughed about the idea when Philip Davies brought it up to Parliament, and then
hired her husband as her manager.
Right, and at the same time, she played victim of that discussion, like literally played victim of being held responsible or accountable for her attitude toward other people. Like, how dare you hold me responsible? How dare you treat me like the things that I say and do matter, right? But if she if she was complaining, then it would matter, right?
Yeah, I'm just an elected official. How dare you care about what the hell I have to say or what I think?
Yep. Well, we got some other super chats. We have Keyblade Master Andy gave us $5 Canadian and said, "Art imitates life, and life often imitates South Park." It's kind of funny because modern feminists often remind me of Wendy. So, and it's very self-important. Very self-important.
Yes.
And Bobo says feminism, or gave us $2 Canadian and says feminism preys on female insecurity. That's another good point. And I think that's part of the contributing factor to the feminist attitude towards celebration of men. You can't celebrate men because if you celebrate men, it's not about women. And the biggest thing, I think, honest to God, the biggest thing that feminists are upset about with regard to International Men's Day is that it's not about them.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think they figured out they can't stop it, and so now they're trying to figure out ways to make it about themselves.
Well, because their whole attitude is that every day is Men's Day. Everything is designed around men. Everything that exists happens, because men. And, to some degree that might be true. Like, you have the internet because a man created it, right? But,
well, a whole bunch of men.
Yeah, but I really hate that they really downplay the fact that women are responsible for raising the next generation of children, and how much that is so important. They just don't they just seem to, because they're not the breadwinners, because they don't bring home some kind of paycheck for raising their own children that they decided to have, that that means that job is less important, which it is absolutely not. I think it is a major contribution to society, women to raise their own fucking kids.
Yeah, I definitely think that women raising their own kids can be a major contribution to society. That's horrible. Shouldn't have said it, but it's true, because like it depends on the way the woman raises her kids. You know, what attitude is she passing on to her children? And because I think some women just pass horrible attitudes on to their children, but some men do too. You know, especially the feminist ones. Can't forget that there are feminist men too. I would love to forget that, but in any case, you know, on about the feminist attitude toward International Men's Day. I think the one thing that we really do have to keep an eye out for, and because this is in a way this is dangerous, is feminists sort of stealing International Men's Day.
Yeah,
and I've seen this effort in place among feminists with respect to men's issues advocacy the entire time I've been involved. And I used to see them come into the men's rights subreddit all the time and try to shape and mold how men's issues were discussed in that subreddit. And I mean, we would get critics too. There was one woman who came in and literally posted, men's issues are misogyny and I can't remember what the other thing she said. I don't think she said misogyny and like rape culture or something like that. But she was just absolutely, you know, the idea that we should have concern for men at all, any consideration, is somehow misogyny in her mind. And she was just irate about it. But then we also had like feminists that would come in and say, you know, you really have a point about male suicide, but my toxic masculinity. You know, you really have a point about custody issues, but it's because patriarchy views women as primary caregivers, and if we get rid of patriarchy, we won't have that problem anymore, so you should help us fight the patriarchy.
Yeah, it's still men's fault. It's always men's fault, because they view men as the ones that have always had the power.
Gods and devils.
Right.
Yep,
right.
Everything is always men's fault, according to feminists. Yeah, but this is something that it's going to increase, because last year, the International Men's Day hashtag, if you looked at any posts that appear to be feminist, any posts that were not just let's talk about the high rate of male suicide, or let's talk about gender disparity in criminal court, let's talk about the high prevalence of wrongful incarceration, and the fact that most of the wrongfully incarcerated are men. You know, you look at those were mostly men's issues advocates posters. You didn't see a lot of laymen, a lot of people who aren't involved in the movement posting, and feminists didn't say anything about those issues. Instead, it was toxic masculinity, rape culture, domestic violence, financial abuse, outdated attitudes toward women, basically, you know, a bunch of anti-male independence spiels. And the whole goal seemed to be, if we can take over this hashtag with feminist messages about men, we can take over this celebration and this day. And it's because having a day to focus on men's issues, and having people, you know, hear, hey, it's International Men's Day, going, what's International Men's Day? What's it all about? And they start looking. If they see our messages about men, if they see positive messages about men, messages about the things that need to change in order to end discrimination against men in family and criminal court, in order to address some disadvantages that men and boys face, they're going to start changing their political attitudes. Feminists can't have that. People might step away from their gynocentric perspectives. Feminists can't have that. So they need to dominate the conversation. So they're going to continue to step up that effort. And one of their goals is going to be the most prevalent voices out there on this day, on International Men's Day, regarding men's issues and regarding discussion about men in general. So that's when I talk about getting the word out, you know, like I've talked about postering, I've talked about blogging and sharing existing MRA media and things like that. There's also stuff like you probably have somewhere in your area an AM radio call-in show that happens occasionally, like happens once a week or happens in the mornings or in the evenings, and most areas have something like that, and it's not necessarily out of line if there's a topic that borders on a men's issues topic, or that you know, is a men's issues topic, because sometimes I've actually heard men's issues topic. Call in, you know, give information that you have, share statistics, talk about the existing media for the movement on those, because like that's a whole other forum, and you don't necessarily see a lot of young people using those forums. They're like, radio seems to be the
it's going away.
Yeah, it seems to be the forums for the older folks.
Yeah.
So like actually getting something out there, you'll be in territory that's not necessarily infested with you know, feminist rules and feminist mentalities and stuff. There's national ones you can call, you know, different shows. I think in fact Alex Jones started out that way. There's, you know, conservative talk show hosts like Hannity, and I think Rush Limbaugh is still going pretty strong. I think I heard him on television actually the other day, and his voice has changed from what I remember anyway, but he's still doing, it looks like he's still doing his radio show, and still has, you know, like a huge following and everything. And if I remember right, he does an open line call-in where you can talk about anything every Friday. If you can get, you know, if you can get on, I'm sure lots of people probably call that show. But it's certainly a way to introduce an issue to an audience that wouldn't necessarily otherwise be exposed to it. Right. And you know, a lot of times they bring people on based on the topics of the week and everything, but sometimes they'll bring somebody on shows like that just because they have something interesting to say, you know. And so being able to get our message out, or get our ideas out and everything into areas that aren't necessarily controlled by feminists is a strategic thing, in that sometimes when you're the first person to talk, you have a better opportunity to get people to listen to and evaluate your message instead of knee-jerk reaction to it, you know, reacting to it. And I think a lot of times when we get into arguments with feminists on social media and stuff, people will knee-jerk react because they're like, oh, they're abusing the women, they're arguing with the women, they can't do that. And you get a totally different response.
Yeah. And so if I can, I'd like to talk about Rodney Reed. I don't know if anyone's heard about it. I know I shared it in our Skype group. But this is a man who is in Texas, who is scheduled to be executed on a case of rape. Okay. Rape, not murdering. He didn't like go out on some kind of fucking killing spree. He was accused of raping a woman who, the very next day after she claimed that she was raped, was in another relationship with a police officer. I mean, every bit of evidence surrounding this basically says that this was a consensual relationship, and this man is being he's scheduled to be executed on November 20th. Okay, and I'll post a link. There's a petition going around to try to hopefully get this man off of death row.
You can put the link in the live show chat. And
yeah, I will.
So I can put it on the in the low bar.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just disgusting. Being executed for a crime such as rape. Now, rape is a horrific crime. You know, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. I wouldn't even rape anybody that I hate. Okay, but
well, I would say it's not worse than murder.
Exactly. You know, but this man is due to be executed, and there is so much evidence against this man. You know, saying that, you know, he didn't really commit it.
So against the allegation.
Yeah, exactly, against the allegation. But, you know, this is something that I think, and especially in the state of Texas, you know, we just had the James Younger case go up in Texas, you know, where they defended this 6 or 7-year-old kid from being, you know, the mother wanted to make this child a girl, essentially transgendering a child, from everything that we can understand is against the child's will to be transgender. And so, you know, fortunately the father had, you know, say what you about the father, but, you know, luckily enough, the judge in that case, you know, sought fit to give equal custody and equal rights to the mother and the father, so that, you know, if the mother wants to transgender this child, the father has an equal say against it, so it can't happen. But this is the same state that is now about to execute a man for a crime that did not happen. This was consensual sex. It was a consensual relationship. And it just so happens that the relationship that the woman got into the very next day was with a police officer. So,
now, are
you know,
are you sure that this doesn't involve death in the suspect?
No,
because I was thinking, I was reading about this case, and they used the consensual sex to tie him to her, but she had been killed, and the other suspect should have been the police officer, and a lot of that was ignored because they had this other guy.
Now, I haven't heard about a death. I just heard that he was on.
See if I can find.
I'm looking it up now. I don't believe that the woman was killed. Yeah, I'm not seeing any about a death.
Let me find
as far as the woman is. I'm looking at the sign the petition link right now, and okay, you're probably right. A rape and a murder.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, because usually they don't give the death penalty for rape.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I mean the amount of evidence against, well, not against, but in support of this guy is overwhelming. And, you know, it doesn't matter, because the boyfriend that had taken on a relationship with this woman right after this, well, right after, I guess, the supposed rape had happened, is a police officer. I mean, it just raised so many red flags.
Actually, the Newsweek has an article on this. Give me a minute, and see if I can. There we go. All right, now. We'll see if I can make this a little bigger. Alright, so it says lawyers for Rodney Reed have filed new documents pushing for his release after 4 witnesses, this is from 2 days ago, after 4 witnesses came forward with powerful new credible information which they say exonerates the death row inmate. Reed, 51, is due to be executed on November 20 for having spent more than 20 years on death row after he was found guilty of the murder of 19-year-old Stacy Seitz in 1996. With just 1 week before the state of Texas is due to put Reed to death, his lawyers working for the Innocence Project. So the Innocence Project is involved in this man's case. That makes that actually is a very legitimizing factor, in my opinion, in terms of like everybody that goes to jail, just about everybody that goes to jail says they're innocent. When new information comes forward like this, and the Innocence Project gets involved, it's pretty much cut and dried. They're innocent. And it's just a matter of the maneuvering with the courts, because the Innocence Project would have had to already have enough information from them, enough evidence from them, to feel that they should get involved in the case.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with that 1 week left, they filed a writ of habeas corpus with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and the 21st Judicial District Court, following statements which they argue incriminate Seitz' fiancé and original suspect in her murder, Jimmy Fennell. The Innocence Project said there is mounting evidence to suggest that Fennell is responsible for strangling her to death with a belt in Bastrop, Texas, after discovering she was having an affair with Reed. Reed's lawyers say the 4 new witnesses refute the state's original portrayal that Seitz and Fennell were a happy couple eagerly anticipating their upcoming wedding. Instead, the 19-year-old victim was scared of Fennell, and the former Bastrop Sheriff's police officer was abusive toward her, Reed's lawyers say. The new witnesses include Richard Derleth, a deputy in the Bastrop County Sheriff's Office, who states that HEB staff members who worked alongside Sykes would warn her whenever Fennell came into the supermarket to allow her to hide from him so that he could not start a fight. Let's see, Brent Sappington has also come forward to say he would overhear screaming and banging coming from the couple's apartment upstairs when he visited his father, William Sappington. Brent Sappington's wife, Vicky Sappington, also stated that her father-in-law would frequently express concern that Fennell was physically and verbally abusive towards Seitz. So, and then we have finally Rebecca Peoples, another former co-worker with Seitz, said the 19-year-old confided that she was having an affair with a black man and that she was afraid of her fiancé. So there's some definite evidence there that not only is he innocent, but that this was a crime of passion committed by the ex-fiancé, finding out that his fiancé had an affair. And if this happened, how long ago was this crime? 20 years ago.
96, yeah.
Yeah, 20 years ago in Texas, it's quite possible, it's very possible, in fact, that racism was at play as well.
So I'm reading.
It could even be that way today, but it's more 20 years ago. It's that much more likely.
Yeah, I'm reading an article that says that she was strangulated with her own belt, and tests confirm the DNA of an unknown male is found on her. So who is that unknown male? You know, and again, this, you know, I really don't like the idea of people being DNA like a database of, you know, whose DNA is what, but DNA is so easily transferred from one person to another. I mean, it
well,
can
the other thing is it's not just easily transferred, it's also, it's not a cut and dried thing.
Right.
The same DNA sample that could incriminate you could also potentially incriminate your sister, your daughter, your mother, your cousin, and this is like, it's a good science, and it's good for exonerating people. You can eliminate someone's guilt by showing that the DNA present at a crime scene is not a match to theirs. But if somebody gets convicted based on a DNA match, that's not necessarily always perfect in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I really love and I champion the Innocence Project, because again, there are so many cases that have been overturned based off of, not false DNA evidence, but just questionable DNA evidence,
or bringing forth DNA evidence in cases that were heard before DNA evidence existed. One of the things they've gotten a lot of overturns on is they used to use hair samples as evidence, and it wasn't for DNA. They would look at how thick your hair is, how the cells clump together along a strand of hair, whether it's curly or straight, what color it is, and so on. Well, I have brown hair, black hair, red hair, and silver hair. I have thick hair, thin hair, clumpy hair, straight hair, and curly hair. And if they grab the wrong hair, they might actually think somebody else, if I was the one who left the hair there, they might think somebody else left it there if they look at other hairs from my head and compare the two. And I've actually had read cases where somebody's hair convicts them, or the use of hair as evidence convicts somebody, and then the DNA evidence comes back, and it's actually the hair of a person from a completely different ethnic background. Not that person's hair, but not that person's race.
Yeah.
Right? So, they've had that, and then they've had other forensic evidence that has turned out to be misinterpreted by forensic scientists, and the DNA evidence ends up proving that a different person committed the crime, or that the evidence that they were looking at didn't come from the person they thought it came from, at the very least. So, the Innocence Project has actually done a lot to not just help to free the people that they have been fighting for specifically, but to create reform in the legal system in how forensic evidence is used in court. So that's a really big deal. But this guy's case in particular, having the Innocence Project involved in his case, he has a much better chance. And I guess, let's see if I can find, because there is a lot here. There's a website, so I can put the link to that in the low bar, but the website basically has a description here and events. So I guess yesterday there was a hearing and a rally. Today there were vigils. And somewhere on here, I wonder if they have the link. Let's see if the link is probably higher up on the list.
Yeah, and this is scheduled to happen on the 20th, so 6 days from now.
Yep. So there's justice for Rodney Reed, and there's free Rodney Reed. Let me see what free Rodney Reed looks like. Oh, we already have that open. That is this. There is the link to the petition, so I'll put that in our low bar. And between those being in the low bar, you should be able to find the information you need to sign the petition and contact public officials if you so choose. I think just the fact that the Innocence Project is involved says that this is legitimate, this is definite. What the Newsweek story reported, that says this is legitimate, this is definite. This guy definitely is someone who needs our help.
Yes.
So let me put those in the low bar now. Oh, I gotta get them. I'm on the wrong computer. Sorry. I'm using two computers because everything I'm doing doesn't fit all on one screen for me very well. So just give me a second here. The nice thing is I can open Discord on both computers and then use it to transfer links. That's why I wanted the link in the chat, in the Discord chat. But Discord takes a minute to open and then has its little, funny things it says it's doing. And apparently it doesn't recognize that the message has come through yet. So let me try that again. There we go. Alright. Now I can put that stuff in the low bar. And then with that, I'm going to finish the last super chats because it's 10 o'clock. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, we started talking about this case, and that did kind of extend things a little bit, but I think that that's not a bad thing. I only wish we had started talking about him a little sooner, but that's okay. I should have been keeping up with that chat, and I haven't been. So right underneath the two Patreon links, there's a link to freerodneyreed.com and the Newsweek article, so you can read the rest of the article, because we only read part of the article. There's quite a bit more here, and I'm not gonna go through the whole article on the show, but I think we've seen enough with what we have read and what's showing on the screen now to know that this guy needs and really deserves our help.
Absolutely.
So if everybody can just take a look in the low bar, find the links, sign the petition, share it. If you happen to be in that area and you happen to go to one of the vigils or one of the, I guess there's prayers and stuff, just let us know, how things are going, and I'll try to keep updated on this so next week we can at least give an update as to what has been the outcome with the case. Hopefully they get the execution stopped, because this sounds like this is going to be an egregious wrong on the part of Texas if they don't get this stopped. And with that, I'm going to go ahead on to the last few super chats. We have Aunt Bobo gave us $2 Canadian and says, feminism preys on female insecurity. That's actually really like that's probably the most underlying reason, the most accurate underlying reason for why feminists get so upset about International Men's Day, because it's not about them.
Right. Female that's like one of the pillars of feminism, right? Like you have to be this you have to be somehow aggrieved against men. It's just
Yep. And feminism is not about hating men, but if you don't hate men, you're not feminist enough.
Yeah.
Go figure. Tyler Preston gave us $5 and said, feminists only want International Men's Day to be done in their approved mindset. They want men subservient and women to be dependent on their ideology. And yeah, I would say in addition to that, they want women to be subservient as well. Like they basically, they want everybody to be subservient, but women to be subservient to the ideology and men to be subservient to women.
Yeah, you have to be chattel.
Literally chattel.
Yep.
Mr. Roboto gave us $2 and said, but what of the nannies? What of the nannies? Bunch of nanny compoops. Well, I understand why people hire nannies in situations where both parents work a lot and they just want someone to be present. What I don't understand is how you would pay somebody to raise your kid for you. Like, I've seen both. I've seen where the parents are working a lot and they are there where the kids are, but their attention isn't constantly on the kids, and they have a nanny in the house for some things, or for the next 2 hours the nanny is in charge of the kids or whatever. But I've also seen where the nanny knows the kids and the parents don't. And it blows my mind.
Yeah. But I mean, this goes back to like the fucking World War II, where like, you know, because all of the men were sent off to war, and so, you know, companies realized that there was this wealth of workers in women, and so they employed women to do all of these things. And that is kind of where this whole thing started to break down, right? Because they knew that they could exploit women for their work while, you know, just abstaining from, well, maybe not
I was going to say, it's not really exploiting because they're paying them.
Right. It's not, but, you know.
Or rather, it's not exploiting in the traditionally used sense of the word, where we talk about negative exploitation. Anything you use, you're exploiting. It's a synonym for use. But
right. If you can't be useful, then you're useless.
Right. But and then the other thing that affected that was the labor movement during the Great Depression and at the end of the Great Depression. The labor movement really pushed for an end, and they used morality as a basis, but they pushed for an end to child labor practices. And you know, first with significant reduction of hours that children could work, and then a lower age limit, you know, like you have to be at least this old in order to work. So a lower end age limit of you know, somewhere in the teens, and it wasn't as old as it is now. Like you have to be 16 years old to get a job without, if I remember right, without your parents' permission. But in any case, like they pushed for that. They didn't necessarily push for that because they considered it to be the best thing for the children. They pushed for it because they wanted the scarce jobs at the time to be reserved for adults, and within the labor movement. And so they sort of pushed for, rather than the entire family all working together at the plant, you had dad would go to the plant and mom and the kids would stay home. And those laws passed, and at the same time, as part of the act that included those laws, the Fair Labor Standards Act or something like that, it was in the 30s. It also established a shorter work week, I think a 44-hour initially, and then eventually a 40-hour work week. So you had to have more workers because you couldn't work them as many hours unless you wanted to pay overtime and stuff like that. It established some safety standards as well, which made it more feasible for women to enter the workplace, because a lot of women didn't enter the workplace because of how dangerous it was in a lot of workplaces. The women who were desperate went to work in dangerous environments like textile mills, but they didn't go to work in even more dangerous environments like, you know, Rosie the Riveter was in a more dangerous environment. The work was actually damaging enough that the actual Rosie the Riveter, who played a musical instrument, didn't stick with it very long because she didn't want to ruin her hands for her music. So all of those factors combined, when World War I hit and men were sent overseas, then we're looking at a job market that had a higher need for workers, had a reduced spectrum of workers, and had no choice but to depend on women.
Right. And not to mention the fact that, you know, war changes people, right? Like, so these men came back from war and they did not have that, like, that they didn't have, like, anyone to kind of, you know, coax them back into regular society, because they were so used to this. You know, when you go into the military, they break you down so that they can build you up to be this kind of machine, right? So when you come back from war, you don't really know how to, it's much more difficult for you to integrate back into society. Right.
Well, and they had very little understanding back then of PTSD. I think they used to call it shell shock. So there was that, and then you also had you know, a lot of women didn't want to give up those jobs.
Right.
So a lot of men
Exactly.
came back and found themselves competing with women for those jobs. That was a new thing for them.
Yeah. And that's why I say, like, when the men went to war, the women went to war, and the people, the capitalists, which, you know, I don't want
The
to sound like
capitalists went to the bank.
exactly.
Yep.
They found a whole other, you know, just pool of labor that they could exploit, and it hasn't changed since then. You know, that's why, you know, you have these women thinking that you have to compete with men. No, really don't.
No, but
Like,
that attitude within feminism sort of predates that, but it's spread a lot more readily after that because women started to figure out there's a level of freedom that comes specifically from earning your own money. And especially like housewives, what they had was they would earn their own money and they didn't have bills to pay with it, right?
right.
Now, when their husbands were overseas, yeah, then they might not have necessarily relied so well on a military paycheck. But when their husbands came back, if they were able to work after their husbands came back, if they were outside the kitchen and inside a workplace, bringing home a paycheck, and they didn't have to help the house with the house payment, they didn't have to help with the electric bill, they didn't have to help with the gas bill, they didn't have to buy the groceries and stuff, that was quite a huge level of freedom for them.
Yeah.
You know, it's a kind of like being a teenage boy.
Freedom, but at what cost?
Yeah. You have also got the whole we'll have to do a show on this also at some point. Feminism really lied to women about what possibilities exist for us. And what's realistic versus what's idealistic. But
Exactly.
that's a show for another time.
Yeah.
I think though we've gone everywhere I think I wanted to go with this topic. I think the thing that I would leave everybody with is, if you get an opportunity, if you can think of a place to do it, you know, try a postering run sometime. It doesn't even have to be anything complicated. Like, I'll bet if signs started showing up on just grocery store bulletin boards all over the country that said, "Men are human," it would have the same kind of an effect as
It's okay
you
to
know,
be white.
It's okay to be. Men are human is all that.
Yes.
It doesn't say anything about anybody but men, right? Men are human.
Right.
You know, the implications are big. Obviously, that means that human rights are men's rights too. But yeah, that would probably make a splash. You know, and again, share the different men's rights media that you read. Share the different men's rights videos that you listen to. Don't be shy with reposting stuff, because that's how the information gets out there. People aren't going to see it if it doesn't get shared on social media, especially in today's environment of things getting buried on YouTube and stuff. And you know, don't be afraid to speak out if somebody around you is talking about something and you're like, I know why that's happening, and I know what you can do about it. Say so. That's important. And when you see discussion about International Men's Day and feminists are piping up with stuff about toxic masculinity and stuff like that, don't hesitate to link them to the video from the beginning of this stream, in which we point out that it is not International Whine About Men Day. It's International Men's Day. So feminists can take a back seat and shut up and listen for once.
Yeah, you know, they always talk about they want equality. Well, okay, but the thing is that they always feel like every day is about men. Every day, really? Okay, well, all right, let's set us, like Philip Davies did. Let's try to set aside a day where we can talk about men's issues, and it just gets shut down by everyone. You know, even in fucking parliament, in government.
Yep.
You know, how is this equality?
Well, just simply put, don't let the day become International Whine About Men Day.
Yes.
And sorry, I just choked on my water. With that, I'm going to bid everybody good night. Thanks to my great co-host for sticking out the long sausage with me. And thanks to our great listeners for sticking out the long sausage with us. Thanks to everyone in the background who helps to make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.